Hey there, guys. How did you like that first Beatles song? Some of you probably like it. Some of you probably think it's dumb, but that's okay. We all have our own opinions, right? Like we talked about yesterday, fact and opinion. Fact is, they were a group, a music group. They were an artistic music group. And we're going to look today as we get started and begin to read our story this week at our vocabulary. There are 8 words that we need to know this week. And so we're going to take a look at them now. We'll review them tomorrow and Thursday. Then you'll have a test on them on Friday. So make sure you understand what these words mean. The first word here is dignified. Dignified. If you are dignified, you act in a way that is formal and calm and proper. You're very dignified. That dignified elderly man in the photo is my great uncle Raphael. This is the sentence example here says. So dignified means you act in a very proper way. Somebody who's not silly a lot, somebody very dignified. Stunned. If you're stunned, you are shocked or amazed by something. Example sentence, I'm stunned by the expertise of an 8-year-old violinist. Have you ever heard somebody your age that can really, really play piano or sing or even play violin? It might stun you to see how good somebody that young is. Stunned, you're amazed or you're shocked by something. Polished. A performance that is polished is given with great skill and no mistakes. Mateo's speech was polished, whereas mine was sort of sloppy. Polished. So if you're on the basketball team, the cheerleading team, if you play baseball, if you sing in a choir, you want your performance to be polished. That means it doesn't have mistakes. It's done with great skill. Polish it up. Make it like perfect. The next word is regretted. Regretted. If you regretted something, you felt sorry about it and wish you hadn't done it. Jessica regretted not choosing gymnastics as an after-school activity. Maybe you've got mad and said something to your mom and dad, and then you got in trouble for saying it or being a smart aleck or something, and then you regretted saying it because it got you in trouble. If you regret something, you feel sorry about it and you wish you hadn't done it. Hilarious, you bet you know that word. If something's hilarious, it's very funny. Everyone thought it was hilarious, but I didn't mean it as a joke. Hilarious, very funny. All right, let's look at these last 3 words here. And the first one is observant. Now, observe is a word we've talked about in science. If we observe, we watch something, right? So let's see what observant means. If you're observant, you see and notice more details than other people. I'm an observant reader of faces and know honesty when I see it. You watch something very closely. Are you very observant about something? You watch and you can tell a lot about something because you watch it very closely. Then you're observant. Flattered. If you're flattered by something, it made you feel honored or special. I was so flattered she showed up that I almost forgot my lines. Maybe somebody says, you're so pretty or you're so handsome. That you feel flattered. It makes you feel honored or makes you feel special. Trampled. If something is trampled, it's stepped on and damaged or crushed. I found my sweater dirty and trampled on, but luckily in one piece. So somebody's walked all over it if it got trampled. It's stepped on and damaged or crushed. All right. So those are our 8 words for our story this week. We'll go back and review them again tomorrow. Before we get into the story, let's look at this little chart here. Just a reminder about when we read, it's important to ask and answer questions in our head. This is kind of things we do. We can talk to somebody about the story, but a lot of times we're just talking to ourselves about it, especially since we're doing virtual school right now. Asking and answering questions before, during, and after reading helps you make predictions about what you think is going to happen. Clarify things that might seem unclear. I wonder why the author wrote that, and what did he mean by that? Think more deeply about the text. So some questions you might ask are, when is this happening? Where in the text can I find an answer to my question? What will this be about? Who is this person? And why did the author write this? So maybe you're thinking, well, why are we reading a story about an old group from the 60s? Maybe that's a question you want to ask. Well, we're going to find out. And so as we move on here, let's prepare to read about the Beatles. This story is called The Beatles were fab and they were funny. They were fab and they were funny. And this story, the genre or the type of story this is a biography. A biography is the story of a real person's life written by someone other than that person. So the Beatles were real. They were a famous, famous group. They're still very famous. And of the four of them you see here, two of them are still alive. Paul and Ringo. We'll find out about them. Authors of biographies present events in sequential or chronological order. They present things in the order that they happened. Authors of biographies may use literary language and devices to present major events in a person's life. Biographies include third-person pronouns such as he, she, him, her, his, hers, they, them, and their. We've been working with pronouns. Third-person pronouns, that means it's somebody telling about someone else. Remember, first person is if you were telling about yourself, and those pronouns would be like I, me, my, mine. Okay? All right. Let's get into our story. I've been kind of excited to read this. This is the first time I am reading it right now with you. So I like the Beatles too, and I'm anxious to read this story. As a matter of fact, I'm going to send my daughter a copy of this video so she can hear the story. So she'll be watching it with us. The Beatles were fab and they were funny, by Kathleen Krull and Paul Brewer, illustrated by Stacy Innerst. So let's take a look at these pictures. Look at their hair. They were kind of famous when they came. They came from England to the United States. They're kind of famous for their Beatles haircuts. They look a little different, don't they? Let's learn more about who these fab and funny guys are. All right. I'm going to shrink myself a little bit so you can see all the pictures. Music was everywhere in Liverpool, where John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr grew up. Life wasn't easy in that scruffy city in northern England in the 1940s and 50s, but music made things better. John played guitar and harmonica. Paul started out playing the trumpet, but traded it for guitar. George had a guitar too and could play circles around John and Paul. Ringo was the best drummer in Liverpool. From the time they got together as lads until they became superstars, the Fab Four made music, made history, and made people laugh. So here you see some pictures of them. Here's one walking down Penny Lane. That's the name of one of their songs. John, Paul, George, and Ringo always had fun together, even when they were trying to name their band. Probably called the Beatles. Can you see some of the names they maybe named them that wanted to name their band? The Blackjacks, the Quarrymen, Johnny and the Moondogs, the Nurk Twins, the Beat-Alls, the Silver Beatles, the Silver Beatles, the Rainbows, Long John Silver, Piece of Eight, Long John Silver's band, the Piece of Eight. I can't read some of these, but they had a bunch of names. In the early days, the Beatles performed for hours and hours in hundreds and hundreds of shows around England and Germany. It was exhausting and paid next to nothing. Anxious to have a record of their very own, the Beatles were afraid the band was going nowhere. They used silliness to help keep their spirits up. John would shout, "Where are we going, lads?" "To the top, Johnny." "And where is that?" "The toppermost of the poppermost," the others would yell, and they went on with the show. Here they are, drawing of them. When they got a new producer in 1962, the Beatles tried hard to make a good impression, but it wasn't easy. During a recording session, the producer listed the many things he didn't like about the music, then said politely, "Let me know if there's anything you don't like." A painful silence. George tried to lighten the mood. "Well, for a start, I don't like your tie." The producer laughed, but he still had the Beatles sing their song 17 times in a row. It was midnight before he thought it sounded right. The lads had their first record, Love Me Do, a song Paul had written 4 years earlier when he was 16. Scroll down, make sure we didn't miss any of it. Once the bouncy tune got on the radio, people started listening. Months later, the Beatles' second record, Please Please Me, hit #1 on the charts in England. The band began appearing on English TV, singing, joking, shaking their mop-top hair, and having a blast. The songs were fantastic, but the lads themselves were so cool, so funny, so fab, short for fabulous, that reporters started calling them the Fab Four. The first Beatles fan club started with 35 members and grew to 45,000 within a year. Fans sent their heroes love letters, stuffed animals, and their favorite English candy, squishy jelly babies. It was the birth of something new, Beatlemania. No one had seen or heard a band quite like the Beatles before. Fans followed them from everywhere. The lads became clever at escaping crowds, although sometimes they needed help. Once a police officer slung Ringo over his shoulder to get him to safety. Look at him carrying the Beatle there, Ringo, the drummer. All the girls like the Beatles. The fans wanted more. So John and Paul wrote songs as fast as they could, meeting over tea and cornflakes. As certain words popped up in hit after hit, they began to consider them lucky. Me, please, love, and especially you. When they wrote She Loves You, Paul's father begged them to change its yeah, yeah, yeah line to a more proper yes, yes, yes. But Paul laughed the idea off with a no, no, no. Yeah, yeah, yeah was soon heard around the world, and She Loves You became the first Beatles record to sell 1 million copies. The Beatles were no longer playing in small, seedy clubs. They were even invited to perform for a formal audience that included the British royal family. How should they act? Could the Fab Four still be silly in front of royalty? Before Twist and Shout, their final song, John invited the main floor audience to clap along. Then he peered up at the dignified royal family in the box seats. And the rest of you, if you just rattle your jewelry. Everyone giggled, even the Queen Mother. Fame came upon them so quickly that the Beatles couldn't believe it when they heard themselves on the radio. Whenever a Beatles song was scheduled to air, they would stop whatever they were doing, even driving, and listen to the radio with delight. One night in 1964, their manager burst into their hotel rooms at 3 a.m., waving a telegram from New York in their sleepy faces. Their newest song, I Want to Hold Your Hand, had hit #1 in America. The lads stayed awake for hours, stunned that Beatlemania had crossed the Atlantic Ocean. But John still had to joke. He liked to call the song, I Want to Hold Your Nose. The next month, the Fab Four flew to New York, arriving at John F. Kennedy Airport to the sound of 3,000 fans singing, We love you, Beatles, oh yes we do. 2 days after crossing the Atlantic, they made their first American TV appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show. By then, the Beatles had played together more than 1,000 times. Their performance was as polished as could be, and this turned out to be the most watched TV show in history. Even when the massive audience in America made them nervous, the Beatles didn't show it. All the screaming of the fans was music to their ears, a sign that everyone was having a good time. George said, We like Scream, so scream louder and louder. They were now big stars riding around together in limousines, yet the Beatles had as much silly fun as they'd had as boys in Liverpool. Paul said, There were just 4 of us in the back of that car, laughing hysterically. Laughter was their way of dealing with their sudden fame. They joked about everything, but they soon regretted joking about their favorite candy. Soft English jelly babies couldn't be bought in America, so fans started stocking up on jelly beans. They threw jelly beans at the stage during concerts as a way to show their love. Ouch! Jelly beans were much harder than squishy jelly babies. John had an idea. Just eat them. The Beatlemania roller coaster reached dizzying heights during the 1964 tour. Fans screamed in the Hollywood Bowl, an outdoor stage under the stars. In Denver's Red Rocks Amphitheater, the music echoing off cliffs of red and orange. In Philadelphia's Convention Hall, a city filled with history. At the Indiana State Fair, amid the sound and smell of farm animals. And in 19 more cities from San Francisco to New York. Beatlemania was so intense that the screaming of the fans often drowned out the songs. The lads found it hilarious that the less their music could be heard, the more popular they became and the more money they were paid. Anything they touched went on sale to fans. Even the hotel sheets they slept on were cut into tiny squares and sold as souvenirs. Excited fans didn't just miss hearing the music. Sometimes people were so starstruck they didn't hear anything the Beatles said at all. John once tested this by telling a distracted restaurant waiter, "I'd like a steak, medium, and 2 elephants came, and a policeman bit my head off, and a cup of tea, please." Reporters interviewed the band constantly. The Fab Four often thought the questions were silly, and they loved to give silly answers. Question: which one are you? John said, "Eric." Every fan has a favorite Beatle. John was often called the smart one. Question: some people think your haircuts are un-American. John: well, it was very observant of them because we aren't American, actually. Question: how do you find all this business of having screaming girls following you all over the place? George: well, we feel flattered. John: and flattened. Question: do you go to the barber at all? Paul: just to keep it trimmed, but sometimes we do it ourselves, you know. John: with our feet. Babyface Paul was the cute Beatle. What's your favorite sport? Paul said, sleeping. Question: is your hair real? Paul said, is yours? Question: you Beatles have conquered 5 continents. What do you want to do next? Paul said, conquer 6. Question: will you ever stop being Beatles? Paul said, we are the Beatles. That's what we are. Younger and a bit shyer, George was sometimes the quiet Beatle. Question: what do you call your hairstyle? George said, Arthur. Question: what do you do when you're cooped up in a hotel room? George said, we ice skate. Question: if one of you stopped being a Beatle, what do you think you'd do? George said, I think I'd train elephants in the zoo. Question: what do you do with all the money that you make? George said, I'm going to change all mine into cents, fill up a room, and dive into it. And nothing rattled Ringo, even rude questions about his large nose. Question: what do you think of Beethoven? Ringo: great, especially his poems. The question: how many of you are bald that you have to wear those wigs? Ringo: all of us. Question: how did you find America? Ringo: we went to Greenland and made a left turn. The Beatles' 1965 American tour opened with the biggest live concert in history so far. A happy crowd of 55,600 fans welcomed them to Shea Stadium in New York. The band's helicopter landed nearby as they watched thousands of flashbulbs light up the sky. This was surely the toppermost. And yet with the wall of screams, nothing else could be heard. Not the music, not even the jets taken off from 2 nearby airports. This struck the Beatles as so ridiculous that they could do nothing but laugh. But soon they stopped joking, worried about the crowd getting out of control. Later, a reporter asked, well, where would you like to go that you haven't gone yet? John said, home. That's a lot of fans. 4 years after Love Me Do, the Beatlemania had driven fans wild all over the world. But the Fab Four were forgetting how to laugh. Concerts had bigger problems than jelly beans flying through the air. Now the lads were in danger of being trampled by excited fans. At the same time, as they wrote songs that dug deeper into the meaning of life and love, their music was becoming too complicated to perform live. During their last major concert at Candlestick Park in San Francisco, the fans huddled together on a chilly night. No one quite realized it, but Beatlemania was coming to an end. But it was far from the end of the Beatles and their fun-filled romp. The band retreated to the recording studio where they could hear the music again and continue to make each other laugh. Nothing was quite the same after Beatlemania. Other British bands became popular, but the witty wordplay of the Fab Four put them in a class of their own. They were trendsetters. Everyone wanted haircuts like theirs, and everyone wanted to dress like they did. But most important, they're considered by many to be the greatest rock and roll band of all time, constantly adapting their own music in an extraordinary display of styles and subjects. The Beatles changed music forever. John, Paul, George, and Ringo recorded more than 200 songs together. For decades after, their music would inspire people to sing along, dance, love, remember, cry, think, imagine, and laugh. Wow, what did you think about that story? Had you ever heard of the Beatles before? And John, Paul, George, and Ringo, have you ever heard of them before? What did you learn about John, Paul, George, and Ringo from the names they thought of for their band? They were very creative, weren't they? They were very creative and wanted to come up with a good name for their band. What about the Beatles? What do you think about that name? That's an odd name, isn't it? But it's a famous name. What kind of things were surprising to the Beatles as they became famous? I remember reading that just a minute ago that the crowds were so loud they couldn't even hear the music. So they thought it was surprising that the less the people could hear the music, the more they got paid and the louder people cheered. How did the Beatles' lives change as they became more famous? Well, things got more complicated, didn't it? At concerts, they worried about being trampled by fans wanting to run to them and trample them on the stage and run up and try to meet them. It got more complicated, but they always had fun together, the story told us. They always kept laughing and trying new things, new music. Okay. Well, today's assignment is spelling practice. We're going to go and do a spelling practice now for our first 10 words. And then also we're going to be reviewing this week some of the things that we've learned in the past. So we're going to be getting ready. In a few weeks, we'll have to do another benchmark test on what we've learned in ELA and all the other subjects. So I wanted to spend some time reviewing in place of grammar. Be reviewing grammar skills. So we'll be reviewing some of the things we've already learned. So spelling and a little grammar review to do for me today. And I hope you enjoyed reading about the Beatles. We'll be listening to more of their music and learning more about them all week long. We'll see you later.